A troubling trend. Elected officials blatantly ignoring the will of the voters 4 times in just the last few weeks right here in Missouri. The latest examples: overturning paid sick leave and revoking a woman's right to control her own body. Plus, a member of the Trump team loses his job for committing an unforgivable sin. He told the truth. That moment of honesty gives us a glimpse at the latest dangerous policy from Trump's Project 2025 and taking the podcast on the campaign trail. That's all coming up on this edition of the No Kings podcast. Hello, I'm Tracy Steele, speaking to you on May 15th, 2025. If you're new to the show, thank you. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We're on YouTube and on all of the major podcast hosts like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Let's get to it.
Shut up and sit down.
This is America, there's no kings here!
The Missouri Senate ended its session Wednesday by voting on 2 huge issues Missouri voters thought they had already settled back in November. Republicans turned to a rarely used procedural tactic to shut down the Democrats' filibuster, which was the last line of defense of the will of the voters. But the GOP majority is just too large, and that's our fault. First, some background. In November, Missourians passed Amendment 3, which legalized abortion and enshrined the right of a woman to control her own body in the state constitution. We also passed Proposition A, which said all Missouri workers deserve paid sick leave and a minimum wage that keeps up with inflation. Republicans in the legislature say, you were wrong. You messed up. You shouldn't have voted yes on those 2 measures. And on Wednesday, just before the session adjourned in the Senate, they voted to put a new constitutional amendment on the ballot to effectively overturn Amendment 3. And it would take away abortion rights and a woman's right to choose. They also overturned the paid sick leave and minimum wage escalation provisions from Proposition A. The initial minimum wage increase did survive, but that minimum wage will once again be stuck in place while inflation keeps going up higher and higher thanks to the Trump tariffs. I said a moment ago, it's our own fault. And the reality is, we just have to elect more Democrats to the legislature. The Republicans think they can get away with any power grab they can dream up because their majority in Missouri is so large. The Democrats put up a hell of a fight. They ran all of the right plays, but there's only so much you can do when the other team has twice as many players on the field as you. And that's where we come in. We have to get to work. We have to put viable candidates on the ballot for each and every seat in the Missouri House and Senate. We have to support those candidates, and then we must make sure we turn out to vote. And when we do, the rallying cry needs to be that we're tired of the Republicans ignoring the will of the voters. I said there are 4 recent examples of this trend. Those are the first 2. But Monday night, the Gladstone City Council ignored the fact that a majority of voters in April chose Molly Gibson to fill a seat on that city council. The seat she won was vacated due to the fact that she was late paying a property tax bill. That part of the story is undisputed. But I said late. She paid it weeks ago, before the April election results were even certified. This isn't an example of someone trying to dodge her obligations to pay taxes. She was late. We've all been there. The law says she was not eligible to be seated following the election. But, and this is the important part, she was eligible to be appointed, just like any other Gladstone resident, once that bill was paid. The law says the city council must appoint someone to fill the vacancy. They had the perfect person right in front of them, the person who won a majority of the votes in April, Molly Gibson. Instead, the city council, and I was there to watch it happen, decided their buddy, some commercial banker who serves on the planning commission, they decided he should get that seat. The city council, throughout this process, has promised transparency. Instead, they never explained how they were going to decide, A, whether or not to appoint Molly Gibson, and B, if not her, how they were going to choose someone else for the job. And then they never gave the public a chance to speak their minds once they had picked a nominee. So the public never had a voice as to whether or not he's the right person. Here's my take on it. In April, the voters in Gladstone clearly decided they wanted an outsider for this seat. They had two candidates, Molly Gibson, clearly a newcomer, versus a 13-year incumbent. The mayor suggested that Molly and her inexperience were incompatible for this job. He talked about how there were so many important contracts for the city council to review and decide upon. And she just didn't understand how the system worked. He and his fellow council members ignored the will of the voters, and instead of picking an outsider who won a majority of the votes, they selected the consummate insider. 3 of the 5 council seats will be up for grabs in November. Let's clean house with people who actually care what the voters have to say. The final example. Platte County voters overwhelmingly approved a new tax back in November to fund children's mental health services in the county. The Platte County commissioners said, you know what? State law doesn't actually require us to implement the tax, so we're not going to do it. It's outrageous. The direction from the voters was crystal clear. We want to pay this extra tax because we believe mental health services for children are so important. A judge in April ruled that the commissioners were legally correct. They are free to ignore the will of the voters. Whether or not that's the correct legal outcome is a separate question, but what I can guarantee is they weren't right. That wasn't the right thing to do. There are too many examples piling up here in Missouri and elsewhere of elected officials ignoring the will of the voters. We live in America, which is a democracy. They're not supposed to say the voters are wrong. The public doesn't know what it's talking about. We're the smart ones, so we're going to ignore that result and we're going to do what we think is best. I'm looking at this from an outside perspective, and it seems quite clear that when the voters have spoken, the will of the voters should be respected. We have to do better. We have to hold our elected officials accountable. We need to remind them that all political power in America is derived from the people. The power that our elected officials wield is not theirs. It is ours. We hold the power. We merely lend it to our elected officials for as long as we decide that they should wield it. Now, it's nothing new to have elected officials go rogue, to have them ignore public opinion. But I can't recall it happening so often and so blatantly as it has in recent weeks here in Missouri. And I think it's fairly clear that there's a direct line from what's happening in Washington to what's happening here in Missouri. We have a weakening in the rule of law. We have a president who isn't really interested in concepts like democracy, like respecting the voice of the people. They're counting on us to be intimidated. They're counting on us to step aside, and we have to make sure that our voices are not silenced. Don't be afraid to stand up and be heard. There's power in collective action. We have to get better at using it. Last weekend, I traveled across the state to the Northeast Missouri Demo Days event in Monroe City to give Josh Smead a hand as he campaigns for the 6th District Congressional seat. Met a lot of good people. People who are tired of being represented by one of Trump's lackeys, a guy who never bothers to visit their towns. They really liked what they heard from Josh. In Monroe City, I spoke with Yvonne Reeves Chong. She's the vice chair of the Missouri Democratic Party, and she's working on getting more young voters more involved in the democratic process.
I think one of the really important things for young people, and I probably heard this at some progressive group, it's not really my shtick, but it's stuck. Make space, take up space. So for older people, I tell us, make space. Some of us have been in seats for decades. Make space. But what I tell young people coming in is take up space. Demand to be heard. I'm vice chair of the state party. I'm from Pulaski County. Because I showed up 17 years ago and refused to go away. Refused to go away. Refused to go unheard. And if that means you gotta use an elbow every once in a while, when Shirley Chisholm brought that folding chair, people did not automatically scoot over. You got to do this. You got to do that. But if you believe what you say you believe enough, do that. Do that. It's, freedom, being heard, those things aren't given. I think I heard once that power is never given away. It has to be demanded. Demand your power. Demand respect.
The results in 2024 highlighted why this is such an important task.
In the last cycle, the Trump campaign out-messaged us 3-1 because they were smart enough to go places we weren't. They're on the social media platforms and the gaming chats, and we were on Wired TV. We spent $1 billion on wired. I don't even watch wired TV. We have to go to where they are. We have to show up where they are. But we have to do it in an authentic way. We have to show up and listen before we talk. That's what we have to do. We have to meet them where their pain is. And where they have pain are childcare, student loans, affordable housing, paying the bills, quality of life. Meet people. Meet them there. I mean, protecting democracy is admirable. We have to do it. It's critical. But eating 3 meals a day takes precedent. So, I think Pope Francis said it. It's like, this is how prayer works. You pray for the hungry, then you feed them. That's also how politics works. Feed people.
As for Josh Smead, what's her advice as Josh takes on a career politician who has been in Congress for a quarter century?
I ran for state rep in Pulaski County, and I held town halls on guns and abortion. And I invited the conservatives to come and own the lib. Please, come, put me in my place. But the one on guns, at the end of the hour, we had all arrived at 2 solutions that we could all agree on. You have to go uncomfortable places. I'm a black woman that lives in Pulaski County and is now standing here in this gathering. Go to uncomfortable places. It won't kill you. And we're not going to grow the party if we don't go there. Authenticity. Authenticity is more important than agreement on all the issues. Having those conversations. People don't ask for you to meet their every issue. We have this thing where, don't talk about guns, talk about guns, but do it authentically. Where you disagree, tell someone you disagree. Do that. Meet people at the doors, one-on-one. Of course, the 6th Congressional District is massive, but get a group of people who trust you, that are willing to go out and talk to people and have those conversations. People agree with our values. They agree with our issues. They just need to meet us. They need to meet us in the flesh, not a slick produced TV ad. It's people.
The acting head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency made a big mistake. According to the New York Times, Cameron Hamilton went to Congress and testified that FEMA was vital to communities in their greatest times of need and should not be eliminated. Hours later, Donald Trump fired Hamilton. Telling the truth is the unforgivable sin in the Trump administration. Admitting that government actually has a role in people's lives is apparently something that simply cannot be allowed to occur. You see, to Donald Trump, government exists for one reason: to benefit Donald Trump. Government exists to stroke Trump's ego. Government exists to punish Trump's enemies. Government exists to fill Trump's bank account. He doesn't care about serving constituents. If you ever manage to get him to tell the truth, he'd tell you that he thinks helping average people is a sucker move. Because what are average people ever going to do for Donald Trump that they haven't done already? He's already used them to become president twice. From his perspective, he squeezed that lemon dry. There's no more juice. It's time to toss the rind into the garbage. Let's be clear. People in the Midwest know why FEMA exists. We live in a part of the country where disasters happen every single year in the form of deadly tornadoes. And in this part of the country, you never know when another so-called 500-year flood might be coming. I was just a kid in 1993. Still in college, I landed an internship at the TV station in St. Joe. And well, they were so desperate for help, that internship quickly turned into a part-time job. I was a reporter a couple of nights a week, and on Saturdays, I anchored the sports. In the summer of '93, we saw rain like we'd never seen before. Day after day after day, it rained. And folks north of Missouri were getting hit just as hard or harder. So all that water roared downriver. The rivers and streams swelled, then they spilled over their banks. The damage was hard to comprehend. As a young wannabe reporter, it was more news than we could possibly cover every day. I was working double shifts, driving all over northwest Missouri and northeastern Kansas, bringing home the stories of the people hit hardest by all of that flooding. Entire towns wiped away, over and over. The town of Pattonsburg, Missouri flooded. The people who lived there started cleaning up and rebuilding. And then it flooded again. 9 feet of water inundated the town. They finally had enough of living subject to the whims of the Grand River and the creeks that feed it. So they moved Pattonsburg to higher ground. The entire town. That doesn't happen if FEMA didn't exist. In this part of the country, we know that FEMA is vital. We know that government has a role in people's lives. It's not a sucker's game. It's what government is there to do, especially when people need help the most. And it's not only FEMA. We just got word that the situation at the National Weather Service is even worse than feared. They are trying to fill 155 so-called critical vacancies. Hurricane season starts in 2 weeks. Tornado season is already underway. According to a CNN report, the weather station in Goodland, Kansas, can no longer operate 24 hours a day because they just don't have enough people. Thanks, Doge. Thanks, Elon Musk. Thanks, Donald Trump. You were trying to make a point with all of these layoffs and budget cuts and reductions in force. The people who work at the Weather Service are dedicated. They're passionate. They know their job saves lives. So I know they're going to do their best to get through a bad situation. I'm sure those men and women who are still employed by the National Weather Service will come in for extra shifts, maybe even when they aren't being paid, if that's what it takes, to provide the early warning that keeps people like me, my family, my neighbors safe when bad weather comes. They shouldn't have to work for free. They shouldn't have to work extra shifts. But I think it's a good idea to consider how we got here, because they can't keep doing it forever, and they won't. At some point, all that extra work will burn those people out, and they'll start to leave. The attrition rate will go higher and higher, and we will all pay for it. So how did we get here? Here's one theory. You see, one of Trump's big supporters is a guy named Barry Lee Myers. He actually ran the Weather Service as the head of NOAA during Trump's first term. You know what he did before he was appointed to be the head of NOAA? he ran the company AccuWeather. That's the for-profit weather company. AccuWeather has been fighting, lobbying, spending millions of dollars lobbying in Washington, trying to privatize the National Weather Service. They don't like the fact that the National Weather Service gives away its forecasts and its tornado watches and warnings, among other alerts, for free. They would much prefer if you had to pay AccuWeather to get those alerts, to get those forecasts. But as long as the government is providing them for free, well, it's hard for them to charge for a service that you can get elsewhere for nothing. Now, when good old Barry Lee took the job, he stepped down as CEO of AccuWeather and claimed that he divested himself from all of the stock in the company. But the reality is his family still owns and runs AccuWeather. And they still stand to make a lot of money if the National Weather Service is replaced by private companies like AccuWeather. And they also stand to make a lot of money if the National Weather Service forecasts are less accurate, less timely, and God forbid, if a weather disaster happens and they can blame the Weather Service for failing to provide enough warning, that's the sort of event that might cause Congress to abolish the National Weather Service altogether, to say that the government's getting out of the business of weather forecasting. Even though it's a public good, even though it's been one of the most effective investments this country has ever made, so many lives have been saved because we have a National Weather Service, because we have 24/7, 7 days a week, scientists watching the skies for us to tell us before the tornadoes form, before the hurricanes make landfall. But Donald Trump doesn't care how many people might die, might be placed in danger, might lose their health care, or struggle to feed their families due to his policies. It's our job to make him care, to rally, to protest, to march. Do something. For a calendar of the latest events in the Kansas City area where you can make your voice heard, go to the Do Something Mo Facebook page. I've mentioned it before. That's a group that I have been involved with since the group was created earlier this year, and our events calendar is linked under the featured tab at the top of our page on Facebook. Do Something Mo. This coming Sunday, May 18th, we're throwing a potluck picnic at Berry Road Park in KC North. And looking ahead, on June 14th, please make plans to join me and lots of other members of Do Something Mo and many other people from around the Kansas City area to participate in something that's being called the No Kings Rally. It's going to be held at Mill Creek Park. That's the park with the big fountain across the street from the plaza. June 14th is Donald Trump's birthday, and of course, if you haven't heard, he's planning to throw himself a military parade in Washington, D.C. At least one estimate is that they're going to spend upwards of $100 million on this parade. Over 6,000 troops marching, tanks, trucks. I'm sure there will be fighter jets flying overhead. It's promising to be a scene straight out of a North Korean dictator's fantasies. So on No King's Day, June 14th, we're going to tell Donald Trump that we have no interest in his ridiculous birthday parade, and we have no interest in having a king, an emperor, a dictator. No kings, no tyrants, not now, not ever. I'm Tracy Steele. See you next time on the No Kings podcast.
Shut up and sit down.